police is become helpless. So, Madam Speaker, I beg you to instruct the Minister to come and tell us whether we should migrate to Congo or seek refuge elsewhere. Because if you can't sleep in your own house, in some cases they have been breaking into houses and dragging out either husbands or children.
The Minister was getting information from the media yesterday, and he was equal asking Madam Akulo the other side, the IGP the other side. He was asking everybody when they were asking him about those people that are getting lost every hour and every day.
That the DPC, the RDC, is not aware of some security operatives in the constituency. And they are telling him, you are not our commander. People are being arrested, taken away by some people in UPDF uniform, but the DPC is not in charge.
On December 27, 2020, towards the crack of dawn, a coterie of security personnel under the cover of the Velvet Duck raided the home of Asuman Temakula, Kizza Besigye's driver in Busega. They flung open the door to the house, grabbed him and carted him off. Today, he is lucky to have returned home alive. Since the November 2020 deadly protests that broke out in parts of the country after presidential candidate Robert Kyagulanyi was arrested, scores of youth have been picked up and missing, probably held incommunicado in safe houses. Every other day, reports have been abounding of the kidnap of people largely of the opposition political affiliation. The car used largely during the Idi Amin and Milton Obote II regime in the kidnap was the Peugeot, and the word disappearance was a euphemism meant for those who did not make it back home after they went missing. Today, the vehicle of choice is a van largely referred to as a drone, usually without a number plate, whose occupants are men clad in black attire. The sight of such a vehicle of late instills so much fear and ominously sends a warning to its victims. A former national boxing team captain, Isaac Senyange, who was gunned down in December, had fled his home barely after the van careened towards his home in Bwaise, Kampala. Some of the kidnapped victims who have made it out of these safe houses bear scars of torture, and some too mortified to speak. In other instances, the families have been warned not to speak to anyone, especially the media. Only the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Police are not aware of such.
What has happened to the young people who have been picked up but have not yet been produced in court? You see, you will agree with me that that is a very general question. When you say young people, you should say they picked JJ or court and so on. We do not know where they are. It would be much easier for me to respond than when you say young people.
As police flip-flopped in regard to the killing of Senyange, President Museveni in his televised New Year message revealed that security personnel had gunned him down. In close security circles, the group stalking, fear and kidnapping people, sometimes in broad daylight, is well known, but some victims' families have accused police of shirking its responsibility on learning about the involvement of these men in black. The command structure of the men in black remains opaque, and the public remains in the dark about who sanctions such covert raids and which intelligence outfit is responsible for this group that has adopted unorthodox methods of operation. Also, it remains largely unknown where those kidnapped are specifically imprisoned. As the ruling National Resistance Movement NRM party celebrated 35 years in power this week on Tuesday, a week after the general election in which President Museveni cruised to another sixth term in office with 58% of the 9.9 million valid votes cast, while his closest rival, Kyagulanyi, who scored 35.8% of the vote, intends to challenge a victory in the Supreme Court. To some observers, history has an uncanny way of repeating itself.
Idi Amin was judged for being extremely brutal, But then Obote came in, and Obote had to face rebellion of the NRM. And it was during that time that you would hear of what we call the Pandagari people disappearing.
But a lot of what we saw happening then, the disappearances, the shootings of people by firing squad, this was Idi Amin trying to fight back, reacting to the insurgency that was threatening his government. What happens under Obote II? Exactly the same thing. Obote wins the 1980 elections, controversially as he did, but immediately after the elections, Obote is faced with an insurgency, a military insurrection. Museveni and his group went to the bush to fight the Obote government. As I told you, once a government feels it is under attack, that's what it does. So Obote's government, Amin's government, must be judged in the light of what they were reacting to. I think that we tend to lose sight of that. Now let's fast track to today. Today, President Museveni's government is committing the same atrocities. They are abducting people, they are killing people, they are shooting people, because they're feeling under threat.
Since independence in 1962, Uganda's history is peppered with anarchy, violence and bloodshed, events which are captured in the preamble of the 1995 Constitution. From the 1966 crisis to President Idi Amin's reign of terror, especially through the notorious State Research Bureau, these men have left a trail of despair. Under Amin, the army and security outfits that operated through loose command structures wielded immense powers and by impulse determined the fate of hundreds kidnapped. The once powerful head of State Research Bureau, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Itabuka, in 1987 told the late Justice Arthur Oder-led Commission of Inquiry into violation of human rights in Uganda from October 1962 to January 1986 that while he headed the dreaded security outfit, his deputy, Major Farouk Minawa, had more powers than him. From Amin's reign of terror, then came the 1980 general election. It was a dispute over the result of the polls that drove the then young Marxist-leaning Museveni to wage a rebellion against the Obote government. And in 1986, Museveni, then aged 44, and his National Resistance Army rebel group eventually captured power.
Nobody should think that what is happening today, or what has been happening in the last few days, is a mere change of guards. This is not a mere change of guards. I think this is a fundamental change in the politics of our country. Because in Africa we have seen so much change that change has become meaningless. It's no longer change but merely turmoil. This group getting rid of that group and that group doing worse than the group it got rid of.
In an article published by the New York Times, which screamed with the headline, "Rebel Sworn In as Uganda President," Museveni, who addressed the anxious nation on the steps of Parliament, appeared confident and jocular as he spoke at length without notes.
The National Resistance Movement, I think, is a clear-headed movement with clear objectives and with good membership. I think it makes a very big difference from the situation in which we were, where the very people in power were they themselves encouraging evil instead of trying to combat evil.
He laid out the 10-point program, the policy diagnosis for the broken country, which included restoration of democracy, restoration of security of all persons in Uganda and their properties, consolidation of national unity, and elimination of all sectarianism, defense and consolidation on national independence, laying a basis for building a self-sustaining national economy, restoration of the war-ravaged areas, elimination of all forms of corruption in public life, settling the peasants that had been rendered landless, encouraging cooperation with other African countries, and use of state and private sector as well as cooperatives in the development process. At the commencement of his government, the NRA, now NRM, largely appeared to have embraced the 10-point program. Museveni's first cabinet was a blend of politicians across the political aisle. The government was frugal in its expenditure, that the president said he would not purchase expensive furniture from the West, but buy it locally, and cabinet ministers drove the modest Nissan Laurel vehicles. The economy grew rapidly, and Museveni was touted by the West as a new breed of leaders in Africa that would transform the backwater continent. The economy continues to grow, albeit at an underwhelming rate. There are visible investments in energy, transport infrastructure, and generally, life has slightly improved. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to grow, as the highest paid commercial bank executive's monthly payday is the equivalent of a nurse's annual salary. Corruption has been normalized as a way of patronage. The biggest part of the population is still trapped in peasantry agriculture. Land evictions, sometimes by top officials, are a routine news feed, and institutional decay is a cancer that cuts too deep in government. But as Museveni seeks to rule for nearly 4 decades, some observers say he finds himself in the exact position of his predecessors as he sits on his laurels.
The similarity for me to which I want to draw attention is that a government feeling under threat will lash out. But the 3 governments we are comparing were facing different types of threats. 2 were facing armed threats. This one is facing a political threat, and it's reacting as if it is facing a military threat.
What we fought for is written down. Our doctrine is written down. And NRM, when I think of 35, I think it's bigger than 35. There are people who were born in NRM who are now bigger than me. So NRM is a system that Ugandans adopted. Now, if it goes wrong, the same Ugandans can change it. But agitation for positions, that's different. Even in a company, people agitate for positions. They can be president, yes, but do what? Will you change the foreign policy? What is your economic policy? These are what we think about.
If you have not done anything in 35 years, what is it which is new that we should expect you to do? So I think this is a question in the minds of the people. Some people may lose their patience and say, look, we have waited for too long. By the time the NRM came to power, many of the children who are now holding offices of responsibility were not there. They were born during NRM. They have lived through NRM. They have seen nothing else but NRM. So they have nothing to compare NRM with.
It was in 1999 that his former personal physician during the Bush War, Kizza Besigye, wrote about the ills of the NRA, now NRM hierarchy, when he authored a paper titled An Insider's View of How NRM Lost the Broad-Based Principles. Besigye's paper chronicled how President Museveni had betrayed the ideals that inspired the 1981-1986 Bush War, accusing him of nurturing undemocratic and intolerant tendencies. Besigye, who has since stood against Museveni 4 times in 2001, 2006, 2011 and 2016 and came second in the polls, indicated at the time that he was convinced that Museveni was seeking a life presidency. When his proposals were shot down, he made the decision to challenge him in the 2001 polls, which set him on a collusion path with his former boss. Another Bush War veteran, John Kazora, in his memoir, Betrayed by My Leader, recounts of how former First Deputy Prime Minister, the late Eria Kategaya, failed to recover wholly after disillusionment when he learnt much later in the years that his childhood friend was not thinking of handing over power. The late Kategaya had earlier on attempted to dissuade Besigye not to contest against the incumbent in 2001 because he was convinced that Museveni was serving his last term. In 2003, the president purged a number of ministers, including Jaberi Bidandi Sali, Eria Kategaya, Miriam Matembe, and Sarah Chiinji, who spoke out against the move to lift the presidential term limits in the constitution. Asked about what he thinks of the status quo, Major General Pecos Kutesa, who was part of the NRA, was measured in his response.
I'm not interested. I'm not averse to opposition, because for every move, every positive move, there is always an equal negative opposing move. It's a law of nature. You can't have smooth running. That what you taught in 1920 is pertinent in 2000. No. So this is growth, and people are going to experiment in all ways and to come back to what they think is pertinent. So when you say you people, who are the we? Where do you draw the line?
For those who have been around over several regimes, we know that political change cannot always be predicted. Things can happen so quickly that everybody is taken by surprise. I would like to tell you that although I was very young during Amin's time, I remember a certain sense of despondency, at least among people of my parents' generation. They had no idea that Idi Amin would leave. Everyone was fed up. Everyone was wishing for something different. But nobody knew by what mechanism Amin would be thrown out of here, or by what mechanism Amin would leave power. There was a certain sense of powerlessness. How are we going to get beyond this? And then there came the 1979 war, and within months, Idi Amin was gone.
He, however, says Uganda has significantly changed for the better under the NRM.
Everything you do, you must step on someone else's toes. There are some who are enjoying and some who are not enjoying. But nature, the only thing nature is with, it accepts change. Change is the only constant. All others are variables. The question is what form of change? Is it for the better or for worse? Some of us who are in the north think these people are going in the wrong direction. But let them go. They will hit the same roadblocks.
Securing the future, I've already spoken about this. It was a wrong theme for the NRM. I think they should not have made that choice, because people are seeing that nothing is being done in terms of putting in place mechanism for conflict resolution. People have talked about national conference, bringing in people from different political groups in order to sit down and discuss matters of national importance so that we can agree on critical issues.
The ruling party has never really had an interest in holding genuine dialogue with opposition parties. And the ruling party has never had any interest in this because its chairman doesn't have any interest in this. There was a meeting at Protea Hotel in NTV where he invited leaders of opposition parties. I remember FDC boycotted, but I remember the president of the Democratic Party was there and a few others. They waited the whole day. I think he turned up at 8 p.m. and gave them a lecture and then left. Now, there were suggestions at some point that the Swedes were trying to pursue that avenue again, and they had even chosen an academic who was going to chair the process of dialogue between President Museveni and his opponents. And that didn't happen either.
Later in May this year, President Museveni will be commencing a sixth term to extend his rule to 40 years in power. The pronouncement he made on the hallowed grounds of Parliament on the day he took power on January 26, 1986, that the problem of Africa was tied to leaders who stayed in power for long, may seem to be in the distant past, but it cannot be erased from the footnotes of the country's history, which has never had a peaceful transfer of power in its post-independence era.